Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is my review of Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker, played on PC. I'll try and keep this review spoiler free, both in the gameplay and the voiceover. Endwalker is the end of 14's Hydaelyn and Zodiac story. You could say it's the conclusion to the story that started with a realm reborn, but it isn't the end of Final Fantasy XIV, which will continue. Coming up with a satisfying conclusion to a story that has set up so much over the years is quite a daunting task, but I think Endwalker handled it rather well. There are definitely a few offbeats in the story or things that at first don't make too much sense, but I'm not sure if that's me misremembering things. After all, this story has been going on for close to 10 years, or if there's really been some discrepancies. But more than that, more than any objective measure of quality, perhaps a better, although very subjective way of deciding if it was a good ending is how it makes you feel, right? Say Mass Effect 3, which had a lot of build-up from the first two Mass Effects, but had a rather disappointing ending. Endwalker has a lot to wrap up, and a lot of questions to answer, and I feel satisfied with the answers they came up with, for the most part. As a conclusion to this story chapter, Endwalker worked for me. I am the sort of person who likes to guess what is going to happen next, and I was rarely right during the Endwalker adventure. It surprised me quite a few times, and it kept the twists coming, without any of them coming across as completely nonsensical or random. That said, a few definitely felt leaning a little in the order of fan service, but fan service isn't inherently a bad thing if it works in service of the story. If I had some issues with the story, it would be that I felt it dragged a little around the halfway mark, the middle. I wasn't a huge fan of the rabbits, but they didn't ruin it for me either. Overall, I think they told a good story with simple themes and wrapped everything up nicely. Unlike prior expansions that finished in the post-expansion patches, Endwalker is wrapped up right away. If you played at launch, you could finish the story at launch. You don't need to wait until, patch 6.3 or whatever. In terms of length, as in how long will it take you to beat the Endwalker main scenario quests, I would estimate somewhere in the ballpark of 40 to 50 hours. For me, the main appeal of the expansion was the story, but how about for other features? Well, we have one new race, sort of, and two new jobs. We have the male Viera. The female Viera were introduced with Shadowbringers, along with the male Hrothgar, and this female Hrothgar slated for release sometime in the future. The two new jobs, Reaper and Sage. Reaper is a new DPS that works in tandem with a Void entity wielding a scythe. I've not really played it too much yet because I'm not really into the whole scythe Reaper-y thing. I'll level it up though at some point. It seems, at least starting out, at level 70 it's fairly simple, but I've heard that it gets a bit more complex once you get things like your Shroud and all that, and it seems to be right now one of the strongest DPSs in the game. It might be too early to really judge Reaper in terms of how effective it is and where it fits into party composition and all that. Indeed, Endwalker gave us quite a big shake-up of existing jobs. Well, some jobs had extremely drastic remakes or changes, and then also the whole game had a downscaling of statistics and potencies and underlying changes like that, which might affect things in other ways. But right now, for example, Monks and Reapers seem to be the top DPS for melee, and although people were complaining that Scholar got nothing new or nothing interesting, Scholar seems to be one of the best healers now, so who can say? If we look at a job like Samurai, it didn't on the surface change all that much with Endwalker. We got a few new abilities, some upgrades, some charges added here and there, but superficially it didn't change very much. Whereas Summoner is, for all intents and purposes, a new job, having undergone another major rework. What is this, like the third big rework for Summoner? Because Summoner's always been the job that never really made much sense, in my opinion. Now it's closer to feeling more like an actual Summoner. They lost all their damage over time abilities, which some people may lament if they enjoy that, dot playstyle. But overall, I would say Summoner has definitely been improved. Sage, on the other hand, the other new job, is a healer that I'm really enjoying so far. Along with Scholar, it is a barrier healer, whereas White Mage and Astrologian are now the regen healers. Once again, it's too early to form conclusive opinions, though from what I'm seeing here and there in the community, some people seem to think that Sage is a bit underpowered compared to some of the other healers. For me, I would say it feels like one of the more complex healers. Scholar is the easiest one for me, then White Mage, then Astrologian. But of course this also comes down to what you play. I play Scholar the most, so maybe that's why I find it the easiest. For me though, Sage is a very welcome addition to the game, and it's going to be my main healer now. As with most expansions, people are making a lot of knee-jerk reactions saying, oh, this class is useless now, or this class is broken, blah. Once it all settles down, I'm sure the developers will buff and adjust things as required. In Shadowbringers, there was a very small gap, if you ask me, between the strongest DPS and the weakest DPS, and I'm imagining and hoping the same will happen here. Now, as with most expansions, we have 6 new areas, 3 trials, and a handful of dungeons. The areas are nice, the dungeons are decent, but the trials are where most of the enjoyment comes from, for me. If I had to raise some complaints, it's that a lot of the dungeons have recycled armor sets from earlier in the game, as in from other expansions, they're just recolored. It isn't a huge problem, but for me, part of the fun of a new expansion in an RPG or an MMO is trying out all the new armor and all the new weapons. And items in 14 are almost purely just there for visuals. They are all stat sticks. It's not like you need to get this sword that has a special effect, you just need the sword that has the higher item level. Same for armor. Now of course some people say, if they're like kind of min-maxing, well maybe they go want a slightly lower item level but they want this item that has, you know, spell speed or doesn't have spell speed or things like that. But for the most part you just go for whatever item level is highest. So when you have these recycled items just with higher numbers, well, I find that pretty disappointing. Other issues would be that the game still has some incredibly low resolution textures that are honestly rather an eyesore. Look, I'm not the sort of person who's going to walk around in first person view with my eyes glued to rocks and go like, this rock is low res or whatever, but when you have a cutscene, maybe an important cutscene, and the character standing there has like a PlayStation 1 texture that's like right up against the camera on their clothes, that's jarring, it's distracting. And we still have no real anti-aliasing solution, meaning the game can have some really awful shimmering and jagged edges that hurt my eyes, especially in areas, for example, with a lot of trees or foliage. In general, the game's engine needs some upgrades. The lighting is nice, the animations are nice, a lot of it is nice, but low resolution textures and we need proper anti-aliasing. These are 2 very important things that we need in 14 going forwards. It might also be worth pointing out the issue of the huge login queues at the expansion's launch, and they're still ongoing now, taking hours to get into the game at all. I think the biggest queue I saw personally was maybe 6,000 or 7,000. I've had people telling me that on the American servers they were in a queue of like 30,000 people, which is, I mean, that's not cool. Say you get home from work at 5 PM or whatever, you join the queue at 6, you're gonna get in the game at like 1 AM, or like when you don't have time to play. That sucks. But it's not really a problem about the game, it's more about the infrastructure and the servers, and to some extent, I understand, right? Because there's been a lot of shortage of electronic components, you know. If you can't actually buy more servers or set up more servers because of real world situations, well, there's not much you can do. So to some extent I understand these problems. It sucks though, and they do need to give some sort of compensation. So far they've given out some free game time. I think at this point they need to give out more, because a lot of players are still unable to get into the game they are paying for. Beyond that, they've also done things that they often do at expansion launches. They split zones into 3 different instances and stuff like that. And they try and become stricter with the AFK things. And Final Fantasy had a huge explosion of popularity in the summer. Nevertheless, it's still very frustrating for a lot of players who've been unable to play because of it. And then you have things like the account side. The whole account management system for 14 is honestly pretty terrible and needs a lot of work. Most of the issues thankfully don't really come from the development side. They're more from the Square Enix side, how they handle things behind the scenes, I guess you could say. Whilst I don't often touch on music and audio, well, Endwalker has some amazing music and sound design if you ask me. Somehow each expansion is better than the last when it comes to that. I mean, I thought they peaked with Shadowbringers. Somehow they trumped it again, in my opinion. So if you're somebody who enjoys the music of 14, who doesn't, honestly? You'll love what's in store for you in Endwalker. Overall, Endwalker satisfies in most of the important ways. There are absolutely still some areas that need improvement. Most of these are underlying issues with the game, such as, the anti-aliasing, or other things where you can tell this is leftovers from a game that was meant to run on the PlayStation 3. And then you have some things like classes and jobs becoming more and more homogenized, like reskins of each other, with the same abilities but different animations. This is a problem that stems from bringing the player, not the job or class. There's no great solution for this. If the jobs are very unique, then you're going to run into situations where people don't want people to come on job Y, or maybe you join and people want to kick you because you're not this job that they want. It's understandable in some ways, but it can be a shame. I like when each class is unique and brings something unique to the table, but I enjoyed Endwalker, and I'm looking forward to what comes next from the development team. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Now I must proceed to level every job to 90. Ciao.